Well, hi everyone and welcome back. Been away for a few weeks now, a combination of bad weather in the UK. Mitch has bought a new house, so he's not been able to film, and I've still not fully recovered from my illness, and because it's so cold, I'm not in the mood for getting under cars. And today's no different. I'm really not in the mood for getting under cars. We've got another day of really severe winds and heavy rain coming. So I thought it'd be nice to do something a little bit more undercover and a little bit more educational for a change. Now, typically, I've said in the past, and I'll stand by it, I've got no intention of doing any videos that relate to fault finding. That's not what this channel is about. However, this one is going to be slightly different. It is going to be on the educational side, and it is slightly veering towards fault finding. And there's a reason I've decided to do that today, and that's mostly because of messages that I've read on forums that are really starting to upset me, get to me a little bit, because people that have no experience in repairing cars are buying these cars and don't have the money to pay to get them repaired. And so they're going straight onto the forums, they're not introducing themselves and straight away saying, I've got this problem, how do I solve it? Now, if you're one of those people, what's going to happen is one of three things. There's three types of people that reply on forums. First of all, there's the malicious type. Really horrible people that realise you don't have any experience, and they're going to steer you down the wrong path deliberately just to make life horrible for you. The second type of person is the person who's good at heart and is genuinely trying to help, but unfortunately they don't have any experience themselves, and they often pass on information that they've read on another forum or read somewhere or other, or something they heard or something someone told them. They're passing that information on, and quite often that can be wrong. And the third person is the very knowledgeable person, but they can't see your car, just as I can't see your car. And they are going to give you a whole bunch of information. So if you say my car won't start, what could be the problem? They're going to be, it can be A, B, C, D, E, F, G, whatever. And they're going to give you a whole list of possible faults. And the messages I'm then seeing come back from you is saying, well, I replaced all of those parts and I've still got the problem. Well, yes, the chances are you will still have the problem. They have given you a list of possible causes. It is impossible to say exactly what the fault is without diagnosing the fault. And that's why garages have mechanics that have been specially trained to fault find. So today we're going to talk about the ignition system. I'm going to give you a rundown on all the component parts of the ignition system. We're going to see how they're all connected together, and I'm going to give you some very basic tips, and they are only tips on how you can solve problems with your ignition system. Now, before we get started, there is a couple of things I have to say. First of all, a big thank you to the patrons of the channel. Some of you are quite new as patrons, and I will be in touch. There are some benefits to being patrons. I realise I'm a little bit behind time with contacting some of you, but I will be in touch as soon as I feel well enough to start getting up to speed with everything. And the second thing I want to point out, most important of all, is I am not a professional mechanic. Everything I do for this channel is based on my own experience and knowledge and stuff that I've picked up and learned from the cars that I work on day in, day out. So please, if you intend on carrying out any work on your car or listening to anything that I'm saying today, please seek professional advice before you go ahead with it. Also, do not contact me after doing anything to your car or before doing anything to your car saying, I've got this problem, how do I fix it? That's not what this channel is about. I'm getting around 30 people a day now contacting me through different mediums, telling me about your problems. I really am sorry. I would love to help everyone, but I do this channel for free. Everything I pay for out of my own pocket, and I cannot give up my normal daytime job to sit on the computer and help everyone around the world with our problems. That's what a mechanic is for. So this channel is purely my little deeds with my little cars, and I'm just sharing them with you. So that said, let's move on with this video. So the ignition system on your car is the part that produces a spark which ignites the fuel and causes the explosion in the engine to turn the engine over and propel your car. Now, the system we're going to talk about today is the same for all of the models with a double overhead cam. So whether you're front wheel drive, rear wheel drive, left hand drive, right hand drive, turbo or non-turbo, as long as you have the double overhead cam, it's the same setup exactly as far as I can remember off the top of my head. The only difference or different model is the model with the single overhead cam, which has a distributor rather than electronic ignition. So, starting off, we'll make it as basic as possible because it is supposed to be instructional. Professional mechanics out there, or mechanics that have been doing this for a long while as a hobby, will not learn anything at all today, I don't think, but you never know. So we start off with the spark plugs. You have 6 spark plugs in your engine because it's a V6. 6 cylinders, 6 spark plugs. Those spark plugs need a way of getting the energy to them to make a spark. And for that, we have the high tension lead. Now these are a special lead that is able to handle very, very high voltages without leaking electricity out anywhere. Now there's 6 leads because you have 6 plugs. Each lead connects to a plug, like so. Now of course this is all going to be on your engine, but we're going to do it out of the car first of all, and then I'll show you where it's located on the car. Oh, hang on, that's lead 6. So 6 sparks, 6 leads. Now we need a way of producing high voltage electricity to make a spark at the far end. That electricity is produced by an electronic coil. Now this is something similar to, what's similar to this? A stone gun. They've used this method of producing a spark for so long, and I can't think of a single other thing that it's used on. Televisions, the old cathode ray tube televisions used a similar method to produce a high voltage to make the electrons hit the front of the screen. So all it does is, inside is 2 separate coils. One coil takes in 12 volts, and the secondary coil, which is a much bigger coil, upgrades that 12 volts to whatever voltage is required to produce a spark, certainly many thousands of volts. Now because we've got 3 coils, each pair of spark plugs uses 1 coil, so 2 will fire simultaneously. Now I'm not going to necessarily connect these in the right order, we're just going to connect them up just for simulation purposes, but again I will show you on the car. So now we have a system to produce the high voltage. Now what's going to tell those coils to switch on and off? Well, it's 2 things really. Because it's electronic ignition, we need an electronic switch. That switch is most commonly known to everyone as the PTU. Now these have done 30 years of really hard work, and they are starting to fail now. Fairly standard. Anything electronic that lasts 30 years is a damn miracle, especially something that's in the heat of the engine, the cold of the winter, and performing thousands of times a second to keep your engine running. So the PTU needs to connect to the electronic coils, and for that we have a wiring loom. Now this looks really messy and complicated. It's nothing of the sort, it's just about understanding what we have here. And if I get the right plugs, that's this set here. These connect to the ECU, 2 sets of wires. Now the ECU is actually 2 devices in one box. We have one part of it which controls the coils, and the other part, one is from the ECU and controls the coils. I'll start again. One plug, here's where it's getting confusing. One plug goes to the coils, the other plug goes to the ECU and the tacho, the rev counter on your display. Now I've got it. Okay, so what happens here? Signals come from your ECU into the PTU. Oh my god, it's going to be one of those days. Go to the PTU. The PTU then sends the signals out of the second plug and go into the electronic coils. If I get that round the right way. We've got one other device on here, which is a capacitor. It's mostly to stop noise on the line so your radio doesn't get that horrible buzz. So that also connects here. Now we go further down the line, in fact right to the far end, and this end will connect to your ECU. Now this is your electronic control unit, and it tells the PTU when to switch on and off the coils individually. And that is based on a whole bunch of other stuff. Now I'm not going to overcomplicate things. In fact, I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible for you, because what you see here is that magic box, the ECU, sending a whole bunch of wires to a whole bunch of plugs and a whole bunch of other stuff connecting to them. And to the average person, that looks like a really daunting, scary set of bits and bobs. And for most people, you want to switch off at this point, because what's the point in carrying on with something you don't understand? So right now I'm going to give a very brief description in layman's terms of what the ECU is, what it does, and how it relates to your car. So here we go. I'll make this as simple as I can. The ECU is a computer. All of you have got one of these in your house, I'm sure. If you don't, well, you must have, because you're watching this, or you have a phone, which is also a computer. On the back of your computer, you've got a whole bunch of plugs. No different to the ECU. Simple so far? Now, all of those plugs are there for a reason, and on older computers you would have seen a whole lot more. On the modern computer, a lot of this stuff is integrated now, but still we have lots of plugs, and they're there for a reason, and this is to make sure the computer can interface with things around it. You'll have your screen. You need a screen to see what's happening. You're going to need a keyboard. It's a way of you communicating with your computer and other things. You'll need a mouse. Makes life a lot easier. Possibly a modem, or modem's a bit old now. What are they? A router, yes. You might have a scanner, a printer. What other stuff do you connect to a computer? Webcam. You've got lots and lots of things that all connect to your computer. I hope this is as simple for you as I'm trying to make it, because that's exactly what's happening here. But instead of having routers and scanners and everything connected to all these plugs, you've got sensors, and those sensors are placed all over the car. And it's purely so that the ECU can get information back, and using that information, it can keep the engine performing at its best possible rate. Keep it economical, smooth, it adjusts for atmosphere and a whole bunch of other things. So the two devices are doing exactly the same job. A computer, bunch of wires to a bunch of sensors or interfacing devices, gives you everything you want. Easy. Now we better look at where these all are on the car. So we just talked about 5 or 6 different parts that are part of the ignition system that is needed for it to work properly. I've lined them all up on the table so you could see how they all connect together, and now we're going to look at them on the car so you know where they are on the car. Now I've chosen to use a non-turbo car because this gives much easier access for visibility. However, they are in exactly the same location on the turbo model, just a bit harder to get at. So let's start at the front. Under this cover here, we have 3 spark plugs connected by 3 of the HT leads. Then we have 3 more HT leads that go round the back, and underneath the plenum here is the rear 3 spark plugs. Now for those of you that regularly follow my channel, I did a video, I believe it was a competition video for one of the, it was a competition winner, but was it for the forum or the YouTube channel? Can't remember, but someone won a competition for me to do some service work on their car or something, and we videoed that. It shows you where all the spark plugs are and how to remove them. So if it's a job you're thinking of doing, you can check into that video. So we've got our 6 HT leads going into the 3 ignition coils. Now if you look on this metal plate here, there's some numbers. That's number 6, number 3, 5, 2, that'll be 4 under there, and 1. Those numbers are worth noting because they tell you which lead goes to which plug. So this one will go to number 6 on the rear bank. Number 1 here goes to plug number 1, and so forth. So if ever you change your leads, you'll be sure of getting the right lead in the right place. So that's our set of ignition coils. Now underneath this hose here, we have the PTU, just here, and then you can see all the cables go down. If I can get my hand in here, it's this cable here, which is the big thick one, which comes round the airbox here, round the side of the battery, up and through the firewall behind there. Once it goes through the firewall, it then goes to the fuse box and then onto the ECU, just as we talked about just a minute ago. Now I didn't connect the fuse box a minute ago. This is the fuse box you're going to be looking for. It's located in the footwell. If it's a left-hand drive car, it's on the left-hand side. If it's a right-hand drive car, it's on the right-hand side. And inside here are a bunch of fuses. Now I pointed those out to you for a reason, because they're going to be something we talk about in a minute with the fault finding. So that's the location of all the parts. Now I want to give you a few pitfalls on parts that you may need to replace, some of your buying options, some of the things you want to avoid if you can, to make sure that your car all runs well. So let's have a look at some of those pitfalls. So let's start off with the spark plugs. Spark plugs are a really important part of the car, and if you look in your service manual, you will find exactly which spark plug you need to buy to make sure your car performs properly. Now, they do give advice on if you're in a really hot climate or a really extreme cold climate to maybe change the spark plug to a different temperature rating. But I really strongly recommend that you follow exactly what the manual says. Now, I do see people on forums saying, upgrade your plugs to this or that or whatever. If you want to follow that advice, that is up to you. But please bear in mind, these people may be giving wrong advice, either maliciously or accidentally, or the advice they are giving you may be based on their car. So they might be a tuning specialist or may have uprated their engine in some way, and therefore they need different plugs to suit their upgrade. If you start messing around with the plugs and going away from what's recommended, you may find that you start to get other issues with your car that wasn't there before, and then you go trying to diagnose faults that really shouldn't be there. So I'd strongly recommend you always buy the recommended plugs for your car. Now, as far as plug faults go, there are a number of things you can look out for if you suspect you've got a faulty spark plug. I'll try and go through some of them now. One of them is this ceramic here is known to crack from time to time, and that will cause leakage of the high voltage spark to the side of the engine rather than the inside of the engine. So watch out for cracks in the ceramic. You will certainly feel it if you try wriggling it around that there is a crack or some movement, and there shouldn't be. Another one I've seen from time to time is gases leaking out between the ceramic and the metal. It's not very common, but I have seen it a couple of times. Another one is when the electrodes are burnt away. This one isn't burnt away, but you get them where the electrodes are burnt away, and that may well indicate that you've got some sort of fault with a car. Another one is this is your positive terminal, and that runs through a rod down the center to this pin in the middle. It's not uncommon for the rod in the middle to break, and you can simply put your meter on there. If I quickly grab a meter, just 1 second, put your meter onto tone, and when you connect it between the top pin and that center pin, you should get tone or a short circuit or a high resistance, because some of them have a resistor built in. This isn't for this car. Let's see if we can try and original. Okay, so here it did read a second ago, maybe it's high resistance. So there we go, we've got a resistance there. So you should get that, and every plug, if they're new plugs, should all read exactly the same. Just to confirm that, I hope I don't embarrass myself here. So we had, I think, 5.6k. Right, so why is that one only 2 point something k? Maybe that was reading my finger. Oh, hold on, that's a different plug, isn't it? Where's it going? 5.6. Okay, I've got to look into this. That's a bit strange. It could be my meter, of course. It's not a high quality meter. That one's 8. That's very strange. Could be a bad connection. Yeah, as I move it around, I'm getting different readings. So I think I've got bad probe or something. 1 minute I'm reading, next minute I'm getting nothing.
The point is you should get a tone.
Yes, you should get a tone or a resistance reading. If that's open circuit, then the plug's no good. What else? Poor lead connection. This is another common one I've seen quite a bit. Inside here, inside the HT lead plug, is a connector that should clip nice and firmly. As you slide that down, you will feel it clip in. I don't know if you'll notice that or could hear that. You go down so far and then it'll click. If you don't get that click, if it wobbles around at all, you may just have either this is loose on the end because these unscrew, or it could be your connector inside is a little bit worn out. So it should be a nice tight click. Poor leads, contamination. Okay, contamination is a really big one. There should be no resistance at all between the outside of the spark plug and that center probe. So if we're getting a resistance there, which on this case we're not, which is good, then it would indicate that a lot of muck has built up in there, possibly carbon deposits, and it's causing a short circuit. Now, it may not stop the spark in its entirety, but it'll give you a weak spark. So you may want to change your plugs if that's the case, or certainly clean them. So that covers spark plugs, apart from the embarrassment of the resistance reading, which I'm sure is more down to my leads than the spark plugs. That's it. We'll look at the next bit next. So the next part in the system, the HT leads, high tension leads. There's a number of different things I've spotted with these over the years when you go to buy replacements. Now, as far as faults with the original ones go, there's a number of things that can happen. Quite often, this plastic coating breaks off or cracks, and you get leakage through there. Second one, the cover itself loses its insulation properties and it arcs away to the side of the engine. Next one is the lead itself is a wire inside, and that wire should have a resistance to it. Depending on the lead itself, it will have a different resistance. Now if you look in the service manual, it tells you the resistance for each lead. It is not critical, but you need to be somewhere close to the resistance that it gives you in the manual. Certainly, if you get an open circuit resistance, the lead is faulty. Now, this meter, while we was between the spark plugs and this bit, we did manage to confirm that these leads, these are $1,000. They're really poor quality leads, and it turned out I do have a faulty lead, so that's why we was getting poor readings, and I'm hoping it will continue to work enough for me to do this bit here. Just grab your meter. You need to test from the center of the wire there to the center of the wire there, and you should get a resistance as we are doing now. That may not be the correct resistance, so please don't use that in your judgments. Just use the manual and look for an approximate reading around that. What other faults have we come up with on these? Wrong type, wrong size, and poor fitting. We've done, yeah. So, bad fitting caps. I've seen quite a few of these now, where the rubber seal isn't tight on the spark plug, or tight in the engine. So, it has two things that it does. First of all, that should clip in nice and tight, but secondly, it should fit tight. The rubber part here should fit tight around the spark plug. This stops moisture getting in there, and if you get moisture get in, then you start to get arcing. So make sure your leads, when you buy new ones, are nice tight fitting ones. There's a lot of, I was going to say cheap Chinese crap on the market. Forget the fact they may or may not be Chinese, and I shouldn't really use the word crap. Let's just say a lower budget type of lead. And you've got a high performance car. You want it to run right, and you want it to run the way it did when it left the factory. And the only way you're going to do that is spending perhaps a little more money on getting the correct lead, checking you've got the correct lead, making sure it fits correctly. Now, price isn't everything. Believe me, you can buy cheaper quality leads, or cheaper leads that have as good a quality as the expensive leads. So it's not all about price, it's more to do with the seller of the lead. Quite often, a lot of sellers are shifting boxes. They know nothing whatsoever about your car. They buy mass-produced stuff that isn't always manufactured just for this one car. It's stuff that will do the job. And when you've got a car like this, you don't want something that will just do the job. You want it to look right, you want it to feel right, you want it to perform right. So I'm going to tell you a couple of little things that are quite common with these leads, and I'll also try to tell you my theory on why they're not correct. So here's a set of leads that I bought as leads for this car, for the 3000 GT. And on the face of it, they look identical to those leads, except the difference is the length of the leads. Now, if I look for the shortest lead in this set, this one here, even though this set was sold for this specific car, that's the shortest one. When I put it up against the shortest one, which is correct for the car, you'll see it's nowhere near the same length. And lots of people buy these leads, they fit them to their car, and what happens, I'll show you exactly what happens. If you have the wrong lead, the one that I just showed you is this one here. If we unplug that lead, yes, it fits there perfectly. Yes, it fits there perfectly. But what happens is we've got a bunch of extra lead here. And I've seen people do all sorts of wiring jobs here like this. and they try to pack these leads in and shove the cover on top. Yeah, that's great, but you've got a bunch of wire stuck out here. And the same goes for all of these. You end up with big old loops of wire. It looks absolutely dreadful. And because they're the wrong length, the chances are they're also the wrong resistance. So you may well get a performance issue from the lead. So check the lengths of the leads. If they've supplied you the wrong length lead, take it back. You want the correct leads for the car. Now, I have a theory on why these are the wrong leads but sold for the 3000 GT. You remember earlier I mentioned that the single overhead cam is not about what we're talking about today. This is for the double overhead cam. I think these leads that they're selling for the 3000 GT are for the 3000 GT single overhead cam, which has a distributor and longer leads. So make sure you take them back and get ones that are correct for the car. The second issue I'm seeing quite a lot now is people buying so-called high performance leads or upgraded leads. I've looked at these. We all have a different opinion on what's high performance, and I'm not a specialist. As I said right at the beginning, I'm not a professional mechanic, and there are people out there that know a damn sight lot more than me about cars and performance of cars and how to upgrade cars. But for me, these so-called high performance leads are not necessarily the way to go. If you're unhappy with the way your car performed out at a factory, then you may want to see a specialist to get it upgraded for whatever reason. But I was very happy with the way these cars when they left the factory, and I like to keep them that way. And we're left with the same issue. All of the high performance leads that I've seen have got multiple problems. One, again, the lead always seems to be the wrong length. If you're a seller out there that has the right length, good on you. I'm pleased to hear it, and maybe those people should be going to you to buy their leads. But the second issue I have is the thickness of the lead is much, much thicker than the standard lead, and that gives us an all-new problem in that when you try to connect the leads through the proper running slots, they won't fit. And the same goes for the external, on the turbo model. You also have these clips. On the non-turbo you have these clips, but the leads won't fit inside the guides. So therefore you end up with cable ties and all sorts of things, tying all this big bunch of cables that don't quite fit into the car. So my advice to you, especially if you're a novice mechanic, don't go away from the original. If you want your car to perform properly and not have any questions as to why it's got problems, if you use the standard things that fit correctly, then you know straight away that's not likely to be a problem. So I think that about covers HT leads. We'll move on to the next thing. So next on the list, ignition coils. You have 3 of them. Each of them is an independent unit. Now I hear a lot of people on forums saying buy a new coil pack. I'm assuming when they use the word pack, they're referring to this whole unit. That's an awful lot of wasted money, because the chances of 2 of these failing at the same time are pretty much 0. I would say your chances are higher of winning the lottery twice in 2 weeks than having 2 of these fail at the same time without a reason. So there is a pitfall to buying replacement ones, and this is one device that you need to be really careful of, because once again, there are ones that are being sold for this car that are not correct for this car. On the face of it, they look exactly the same. Just a quick scan with the eye, you're going to say that's the right one. The problem is when you go to fit it. You're going to see if we turn these over, the iron core is a slightly different size. And that then leads to when you go to fit them, will you the right way up?
That way.
When you go to fit them, the screw holes don't line up. And there's a second problem. With the ends, in order to line up the holes, this person had to cut part of the framework out on each end in order to get the coils to fit. So make sure you buy the right ones for the job. They'll fit in without any modification, no extra screw holes. I don't know what the output is on these coils, but I do happen to know, or I believe, that these once again are for the 3000 GT single overhead cam. And I've got a theory as to why this is happening. In China, they only sold, as far as I know, the single overhead cam model. And so they've copied parts of that, but because it's still called a 3000 GT, when people are ordering the parts in, bulk from China, they're ordering for a 3000 GT, they're getting the parts for a 3000 GT, but it's not for the double overhead cam model. So whoever you buy from, check with your seller. Ideally, go to a professional seller who knows these cars and insist on the right coil, or better still, go direct to Mitsubishi to buy the coil, and you're guaranteed of having the right part. So that covers, I think, ignition coils. PTU is the next one. I think, let's just check, did I miss anything? Looking for faults on these. A good way of finding faults with any of your ignition system, if you're getting misfires, go out into a completely dark area, no street lights, no lights at all, run your engine with the hood up and look for arcing, tracks of electricity shooting across anywhere. It's something that you will spot on these. You'll spot it on the HT leads and you'll spot it on the spark plugs if you could see them. Little arcs of electricity shooting across. It tells you exactly what's leaking, what's at fault, what needs to be replaced. These I've seen from time to time with cracks in the plastic causing electricity to leak out. It's possible to have a short circuit internally. It's possible to have an open circuit internally. Your service manual tells you how to do checks to look for faults on these with open and short circuits. Service manuals, by the way, you can get free of charge. You don't need to buy them. My forum has a section for service manuals. You can get a copy off there for free, and I believe most other forums also have the service manuals for free. Have I missed anything on there? Wrong type, open circuit, short circuit, cracks. 3 of them, each of them independent. You only need to replace one at a time. That covers those. On to the next part. So next in the line, PTU. Becoming a more common problem now. Fairly easy to diagnose. Couple of things that you need to know about with this. First of all, as I said, it's 2 devices in one. It is not only for switching on and off the ignition coils, but it also controls your rev counter or tachograph. Now, it's not the only thing that could go wrong as far as the tachograph goes, but if you don't have any rev counter tacho, then this may well be the fault. It is a common cause of the tacho not working. They also sometimes fail, stop any spark whatsoever. They don't fire in any way. And on rare occasions, and it is rare, I've seen them where they just won't fire on one coil, but the other 2 do fire. So just be aware there are multiple faults you can have with this. Now, as far as testing it goes, once again, in the service manual, there is a really good description on how to test it. And I'm also going to show another thing that could eliminate a possible fault with this in just a second. Now, I've seen on the forums people saying they've bought new ones and they keep failing after a few days, few weeks. There are a couple of possible causes for that. First of all, if one of the coils go and it's arcing in a place that sends electricity the wrong way, high voltage electricity, that could cause your PTU to go. Another cause, of course, is the possibility that you're buying poor quality PTUs. Now, be very, very careful with these now. There are a lot of copies on the market, and some of them are not very good quality copies. Now, I prefer, whenever I buy a replacement one, to buy one that pretty much looks or is a genuine Mitsubishi one. Now, as far as I can tell, the way to tell a genuine one, or is more likely to be a genuine one, is by looking at the back. Now, if I take this genuine one off here, we've got 2 screws down here, and I also wanted to take this off in order to show you another possible cause of failure. So yeah, so the genuine one, you'll see the back looks like that. On the copies, they're like that. Now I can't say that they are a bad copy. However, all the ones that I've had problems with so far have been this one, so I'm going to assume they're not a very good product. Now there is a reason possibly for that. You see they've got a number of dimples here. Now those dimples also seem to have a raised part, whereas the dimples on these only fold inwards. They're not raised in any way. Now if there's any raising at all, if this is not perfectly mounted to the heating dispersal plate, then it could be that it's getting too hot. The product itself might be fine electronically when you buy it, but because it's not mating properly with the heatsink, then it could be that it's getting too hot and failing it. Which then leads us on to the fitting, which is really, really important if you want to keep reliability. They go onto this metal plate here. I'm just going to grab a rag a second. Now, these plates are starting to get rust. It is critical that these things, when they are bolted onto there, fit perfectly cleanly and smoothly to the surface. If you've got any rust deposits underneath, or as I've said with this, you've got bits that are sticking up, that's going to stop a nice clean mating on that surface. I can feel it scratching. It's not going on properly. You can see it scratching all the plate on there. So this one is not sitting correctly on the plate, and that could be why it's failed. So always clean this, make sure it is smooth as a mirror, make sure these are perfectly smooth, and also put on some heat transfer paste just to give it that little bit of extra what's the word? Heat transfer, that's it. Better heat transfer onto the heatsink to stop it overheating. Hopefully you won't have any problems after that. What else do we need to look out for on those? No, I think that about covers it. So that's a few tips on why they might be failing. Certainly worth looking out for if it's a common problem for you. That's it on those. Now we better look at a couple of possible faults on the car itself, or how to find the faults. So as I've said previously, I don't really want to get into fault finding per se on these cars, but I would like to give you a couple of tips that may save you some money and hours of fault finding if you're not familiar with these cars. These are just basic tips and no more. Realistically, there's only 2 sorts of faults you're going to find with the ignition system. Either the car will turn over but not actually fire off. In other words, the starter motor engages to turn the engine, but the engine itself does not start. And the other one is misfires. Really common problem, surprisingly easy to diagnose. Those of you that have been going on to a forum saying I've got a misfire, and people have been saying, yeah, it's your plugs, your leads, it's this, it's that, blah, blah, blah. They're all correct. It could be lots and lots of different things, but unless you know how to isolate them, you're wasting your money by buying a whole set of stuff when you may only need a new plug, a new lead. Well, you don't buy one lead, you'll buy a set of leads, and any sensible person would also buy a set of plugs. But you don't need to buy the leads and the plugs and the coils and the PTU and blah 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 blah. Just buy what you need and save yourself a lot of money. So we're going to start off with a car that will not start at all. It will not fire in any way whatsoever. A couple of quick tips. The PTU requires a supply voltage in order to make it work, and there is a really common fault with these that is starting to come along, whereby the PTU won't fire at all or send signals to the coils to fire up. So all you're going to need is a basic voltmeter, as cheap as you like. You connect the negative lead to the negative terminal of your battery. Then you unplug the large plug from the PTU, the one nearest to the front. It's got a clip on the top that you push in and then pull the plug out. You want the wire which is nearest to the front of the car, and you're going to connect your positive lead into that hole. God, I'm freezing. Nearest to the front. Now what you do is go round to your car ignition, and you turn the key until the ignition comes on. In other words, all the display lights up, and watch your voltmeter.
Should be one.
Do we have 12 volts or thereabouts? Yeah, my battery's a bit flat. So there you see, just by turning on the ignition, we should have around about 12 volts now. It may be a little more, it may be a little less, depending on how well charged your battery is. That is critical to have that voltage, and without it, you are not going to get the car to start up, period. And there's a simple cause for that fault. Just let me turn off the ignition a second. So that's the supply voltage. It supplies the PTU, and it supplies a permanent supply to the ignition coils. The ignition coils are negatively switched by the PTU. The reason for you not having that 12 volt supply is almost certainly down to a fuse in that little fuse box I showed you that's in the footwell. You're going to be looking for fuse number 12. And if it's not marked as fuse 12, you're looking for the one that says engine. Now, if you've got a Japanese car, this of course will all be in Japanese, and what you'll need to do then is pull out the service manual. It shows you the location of all the fuses. Excuse me. You want fuse number 12. It's a 15 amp fuse. They are starting to blow. I don't know if it's old age or the amount of load on them, or maybe there's a fault with one of the cables. I was speaking to a mechanic the other day who had the fuse keep on blowing, and it actually turned out to be where the wiring loom was going through the firewall, it was rubbing on something and it was shorting out one of the wires. So that's what you're looking for. If you've got that 12 volts, should be happy sailing from there. So then we move on to misfires. Now misfires are also relatively easy to find. I'm just going to take this meter off and plug the PTU back in. And now I'm going to start the engine. Now I hope it's not going to interfere too much with the sound, because it's quite a sensitive microphone. So with the car fired up, this one's running pretty sweet. But with misfires, it's quite easy to find out where the misfire is coming from, which plug or lead or coil pack. Now because each coil pack supplies two different plugs, you're going to notice quite a significant drop in revs if one of them fails. But the engine will still start if one of the coils fails. Now, to diagnose, we're going to need one of two things. You can either buy a proper tool to pull off the HT wires, but I'm not actually a big fan of these. Maybe it's because it's a cheap one, but I find what happens from time to time is it twists the lead inside and has broken it off of the terminal, and in extreme cases where I've had coils where the plastic's gone brittle with age, it's actually cracked the plastic on the HT coil. So I prefer to go to a cheap old pair of marigold gloves, and I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm going to say now. These are very high voltage cables. There is a possibility that you will get a shock from them. I've never ever heard of any mechanic getting such a severe shock that it does any harm to them. Normally what will happen, and I've actually done this without gloves at all that will happen is you'll get a quick crack on the finger and you'll go, oh damn, or maybe use another word, and then you'll carry on. It's not going to bother you in any major way. So, when you disconnect one of these cables, the revs are going to drop because you've taken power away from one of the spark plugs. If you do not hear a drop or change in tone or revs of the car, then you've almost certainly found the faulty one. So if you listen carefully, we'll unplug the lead. You see the engine goes to stall because it's now got less power, and you can see the arcing. So I'll plug that one back in. We know that that one's good. Unplug the next one, and the same thing happens. Now, because both of them are okay, we can also confirm that those two leads, the two plugs that are on the end of them, and that ignition coil are all good. Now we go to the next one. Unplug it, and the same thing happens. And you just repeat that for each of the plugs. Now, if you find one that when you unplug it there is no difference whatsoever, then it means either that wire, the HV wire, or the plug on the end is almost certainly faulty. If it's only one that makes a difference, then it is. I know what it is, it's wrong. If you unplug one and it doesn't make a difference, then you know it's only the lead or plug. If you unplug both and neither of them make a difference, then it tells you it's almost certainly the coil that's the problem. So that's just a couple of quick tips for looking for your fault. You don't need to buy an entire coil pack if only one coil is faulty. However, if you have a faulty cable, a HV cable, or a faulty spark plug, I'd strongly recommend changing the whole set at the same time. That way they're all balanced out and new and should perform correctly. So I think that's about it for this video. I hope you've learnt something from it. It's not a top mechanics advice line or anything. It's purely a few tips on what to look for from a basic fault finding point of view, from buying the right parts for your car and not getting stuck with crap that's not going to fit correctly or may not perform correctly. So for this video, thanks for watching, thanks for going to the patrons. Don't forget there is a forum that runs with this channel. If you've enjoyed this video, please click on the thumbs up on YouTube and tell us that you've enjoyed it. And if you're looking to watch some of my other videos, click on the bell, is it Mitch? You click on the bell and you'll get automatic updates every time there's a new video come online. I'm running a bit behind on videos. I'll do my best as soon as I'm well enough to catch up, and as soon as the weather gets better. Mitch is shaking his head here because he's freezing. So yeah, we'll do our best to catch up with some of the videos in the future. And like I say, for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.